A very warm welcome to this afternoon's EDGE Foundation webinar. We're going to be looking at all things longitudinal education outcomes, or LEO for short, this afternoon. So we're really happy to welcome so many of you here, and we're really happy with the really strong interest that there is in this really important topic. So a little bit of housekeeping first. As ever, I think people are pretty used to Zoom webinars by now, but you've got your Q&A and your chat buttons at the bottom. If you've got a question for our fantastic panelists as we go through, please pop it in the Q&A box. If you want to have a chat or share your thoughts, feel free to use the chat function. That would be absolutely great. I can't promise with such a lot of us here that we'll be able to cover everyone's questions, but we'll certainly pick from those as we talk to some of our great panelists about their work. I'm going to pop a link in the chat to the event page, and huge thanks to my great colleagues at EDGE for curating that so well. You'll find some information there about all of our panelists and the projects that they're working on. So we won't need to do too much in the way of biographies as we go through, because it's going to be quite a tight-packed and fast-paced afternoon, which I'm sure you'll really enjoy. In terms of what we're going to do today, it's a bit of a game of two halves. So we've got a carousel of really exciting presentations from 4 of my colleagues talking about some of the amazing work that they've done using LEO data. Those are going to be quite quick fire, 10 minutes to understand what they're doing, and then 5 minutes to share some questions and discussion. And then we're going to broaden it out a little bit and really think about some of those cross-cutting issues, thinking about access to the data, thinking about the kind of questions that this kind of data can help us to answer with 4 colleagues towards the end as well. So keep hold of your hats. It's going to be an exciting ride. I wanted to start off really quickly by saying why we think this is important. And I guess it really boils down to, in any system, you kind of get what you measure. And so this whole area of measurement is really coming to the fore in kind of the education system at the moment. And we really welcome that, because we think it's a really important debate. So some of you may have seen that our colleagues at Rethinking Assessment yesterday published their work around the learner profile, and we're going to put that link in the chat now. So thinking about a different way of measuring young people's success, trying to bring in kind of broader talents as well. And only today I saw that the former schools commissioner, Sir David Carter, tweeted in response to a question about if you could make a single change to the education system, what would it be? He said measure secondary school success on the basis of where the GCSE kids are when they're 21. And he said we need to look at the longer term benefits of great education, not just measure it cohort by cohort. I can't see his name on the list. I did invite him, but hopefully this will answer some of that question. We'll send him the recording afterwards. But I think it shows that people right at the top of the system are starting to think really strongly and really supportively about this amazing work and the amazing opportunity that things like the LEO database can give us to look at longer term outcomes. And that is a perfect segue into bringing our first presenter to the stage. So if I can welcome Jenna Julius, who is a great friend of ours at EDGE and is senior economist at the National Foundation for Educational Research, to talk about some of the work she's done looking at educational outcomes.
Thanks, Ollie, and hopefully you can all see my screen. Ollie just shout if not.
Go for
Fantastic. Right, so lovely to meet you all and see lots of familiar names and the attendees as well. I'm Jenna. I'm a senior economist at the National Foundation for Educational Research, and I'm just going to be giving you today a whirlwind overview of some recent research we conducted funded by the EDGE Foundation, investigating the potential for longer term school and college destination measures. So just by way of background, we know that schools and colleges play a really important role in supporting young people to achieve long-term outcomes. Despite this, whether that's through careers guidance and support, broader skills and knowledge development, or enrichment. But despite this, we know that the main focus of schools and colleges has historically been more on attainment outcomes and less on broader measures of success. So destination measures have the potential to fill that gap by providing a much wider and much longer term view of how schools and colleges are preparing their young people. So in that vein, our research draws on the LEO data, which is what you're all here to hear all about, to try and understand whether it could be used to better unpick the value added that schools and colleges might be adding to young people's outcomes. And when I talk about value added, we focused on isolating basically the impact of where a young person was studying their main 16 to 18 qualification over and above other factors. So whether that was their prior attainment, their socioeconomic background. So basically we were trying to unpick where a young person, the importance of where a young person was studying their main 16 to 18 qualification, as opposed to what they were studying and everything that had come before that. So as today's event is all about LEO, it's worth highlighting that this type of analysis wouldn't have been possible without the longitudinal educational outcomes data. And that's because it's an incredibly powerful data set, which enables us to follow whole cohorts of young people who have studied within the mainstream English school system, through school, into further education, into higher education, and then into the labour market. So it's worth highlighting that there is a number of limitations, both to our analysis and to the LEO data more broadly. I'm sure the discussion later on will cover many of these, but a couple of things to flag before we dive into our key findings. So the first of which, in terms of our analysis, focuses on destination measures. So just by construction, you can only observe destination outcomes with a lag. And it's also worth highlighting that for our analysis, that was exacerbated by the fact we were only able to look at data up to 2016-17. So in terms of looking at the findings, do just bear in mind it's based on historical data, but this analysis was intended to be exploratory. It was intended to understand the potential for this data going forward. The second thing to note in terms of limitations is that we focused on quite narrow economic measures of destination, so employment and earnings outcomes. That's purely a constraint of the data. We completely acknowledge there are loads of very high value careers out there, such as nursing, which aren't necessarily going to be reflected in those economic returns. So again, just something to bear in mind as we go through our key findings. So in terms of what we found that as you might expect, most of the differences in labour market outcomes across schools and colleges are explained by the differences in the cohort characteristics. So where those young people have come from, what their prior attainment was. But despite this, we still find that where you study does have a role to play in explaining your longer term outcomes. So the institution where you study your main 16 to 18 qualification has a small but not insignificant effect in explaining your longer term outcomes. So just to illustrate this, we found that on average, an individual attending a school or college in the top quarter of schools in terms of value added earns over £1,000 more by their late 20s compared to somebody studying in the bottom quarter of schools. And it's worth highlighting, as I mentioned a moment ago, that this is based on historical information and on a time when there was probably much less emphasis on schools and colleges preparing young people for the labour market. So we may well expect that to change if we repeated the analysis with more up-to-date data. More broadly, we find that not only do schools and colleges seem to be having an effect on young people's longer term outcomes, but they seem to be able to provide additional insights over and above the existing measures which we're using within schools and colleges, such as attainment outcomes, Ofsted, and shorter term destination measures, whether that be higher or further education participation. And on top of that, we know that destination measures are likely to be useful in themselves in the sorts of insights that they might be able to bring schools and colleges in terms of how they're supporting young people to progress and where their young people are going on to. So certainly from an analytical point of view, we think there's a case for increasing the use of destination measures to inform school and college practice, but there are a couple of really big considerations to take into account within that. The first thing to say is it takes a long time for most young people to come into the labour market. So the graph on this slide shows the percentage of young people in different destination outcomes by age. And you can see that actually most young people aren't in the labour market in terms of being in a sustained employment destination until their mid-20s. And there's a real trade-off here, because the longer you wait to look at a young person's destination outcomes, of course, the less timely your data is going to be. But on the other hand, it seems as though actually to get a good understanding of where a young person's ending up in the labour market, you do have to wait a fair amount of time. So there's really a trade-off here, and there's no single point in time which is going to be optimal for looking at destination outcomes. And certainly based on our analysis, we think there's really a case for looking ideally at a basket of measures across different points in time to try and deal with that trade-off and have kind of timely data, but also those longer term insights of where younger people are ending up in the longer term. Another really important consideration, which I touched on earlier, is of course that background characteristics have a huge role to play in explaining young people's outcomes. So you can see it on the chart in this slide, which shows you the longer term outcomes between young people with different prior attainment. And you can see that by age 25, a young person who under the old system achieved 5 A stars to C in their GCSEs is about a third more likely by the age of 25 to be in sustained employment. So that just highlights the importance when we're looking at destinations to take context into account. And we can do this by comparing across similar schools or colleges, and by comparing different cohorts within the same schools of colleges. So it's just really important that we bear that in mind when we're using this data. So that leads us on to our recommendations. So what our analysis we feel shows is that, at least from an analytical perspective, there is a lot of value in exploring whether we could be doing more with destination measures. However, there's less well understood to what extent, how schools and colleges might use this in practice and what's going to be the most constructive and useful for them. So in the first instance, we like to see more work done with schools and colleges in understanding what best practice in using destination measures might look like. And in order to facilitate this, that the destination measures that are available to schools and colleges continue to be improved. And it's worth flagging here that the Department for Education has made huge strides in this area in recent years and is continuing to make lots of developments, but there's certainly more that could be done. Finally, reflecting on the fact that the longitudinal educational outcomes data enables us to much better understand what's going on at a local level, our final recommendation centres around better targeted support towards those young people in schools and colleges who are most likely to fall out of the labour market. So I'll hand back to Ollie for any questions you might have.
Great work, Jenna. Thank you for kicking us off and sticking so well to time. So I wanted to come back to that point you made about the basket of indicators, because I think that was a really powerful one. It's come up in a few different kind of commissions and commentaries recently. So I wondered if you could say a little bit more about the kind of things that you'd see in that basket.
Yeah, so certainly at the moment, in terms of what we've been able to look at with the longitudinal with the LEA data in our analysis, looked at earnings and employment outcomes. And earnings outcomes tend to tell us more later on as young people progress, but are less helpful earlier on. But certainly we've seen some new data come out of the LEO team looking at also sector level analysis, and there's also lots you could do in terms of maybe in the longer term looking at different occupations and better understanding actually for a young person who wants to go down a particular route, what are the qualifications that are most likely to enable them to go down that route. And for schools and colleges thinking about supporting those young people, what has worked in the past and what might work best in the future.
It's really, really helpful. And I think one of the really interesting things about your work was that there was the kind of main report that was aimed at policymakers, but schools were able to get access to their own data. Do you want to say a little bit about the kind of thinking there?
Yeah, absolutely. So for any practitioners on the call, we've got some mini reports that schools and colleges can contact us to access. The idea is, so we know the data we've been able to access is historical. So unfortunately, it is a bit out of date, but the idea is to take that data and to start thinking about what it can tell you in terms of what you might not already know about where your young people are progressing onto, but open that broader conversation about what you know about your destination measures, and what more you could be doing in terms of supporting your pupils to kind of succeed later on in life.
Yeah, and I think we've had some really positive feedback from some of the schools that have done that. I spoke to one last week who kind of used that report and totally accepted all of the limitations that Jenna's mentioned, but they found it really helpful as a conversation starter in one of their SLT meetings, really to start thinking about that point really that you kicked off with, Jenna, of, okay, our GCSE results are okay. We're not going to get hit over the head by Ofsted, but actually what happens to our pupils after they've left? Are they going to university but then dropping out, or are they going to university and then not being able to move into the labour market? Just kind of those questions that are not a value judgment, though all those teachers are doing their best, but it really helped them just illuminate and think about, as teachers, as head teachers, we want to do the best for our kids. That looks like a really good life ahead of them. Obviously, exam results are one component of that, but what else are we doing through our careers program, through our wider work to kind of really bring that about? And we talked to ARC Academies Trust, didn't we, when we were kind of doing this, about some of their work. Do you want to share a little bit about that, Jenna? And I'll pop a link in the chat to the article that they put together about their work.
Yeah, thanks, Ollie. So yeah, ARC are doing lots of really exciting thinking about how they might better draw on destination outcomes, particularly in thinking about those young people who aren't well suited to going down an academic route across the kind of vocational landscape. We know it's particularly hard to navigate both for young people and for teachers. So thinking about the best routes for young people within that and using their destinations data to better inform that.
That's great. And I guess one final question really to help set us up for the discussion later on, more on a practical level. So you got access to this data through a really great pilot that colleagues at DFE were running. But I'm sure that everyone would kind of acknowledge that it took a little while to get there. I know a lot of improvements have been made since then, which is brilliant. But do you want to just say a little bit about the challenges of kind of getting access? And we can pick that conversation up a little bit in the panel at the end.
Thanks, Ollie. So as Ollie said, we access data through the pilot, and I know there's quite a few people involved on the pilot on the call who we should say a big thank you to. So certainly that process has now been streamlined through the standard process for accessing data, which is a really exciting development for us. We haven't yet gone through that process, so I can't comment on that, but certainly it's fantastic that data is opened up. And certainly going forward, at the moment, the data that we can access in terms of LEO is a standardized extract. But one of the things we would really like to see is there's lots of potential linkages with the LEO and other data sets out there that, again, can extend the realm of possibilities in terms of what researchers have been able to look at. So that's one of the things we'd really like to see next in terms of that data access.
That's wonderful. Jenna, thank you so much. I think one of the only downsides of online webinars is you don't get a round of applause, but you're getting a virtual one from the audience right now. And as you step down from the virtual stage, I'd love to welcome David Robinson, who is Director of Post-16 and Skills at the Education Policy Institute, for our next presentation.
I'll just add my little round of applause for Jenna.
There we are. Thank you, David.
Hi, everyone. I am David Robinson, Director of Post-16 and Skills at the Education Policy Institute. And I will share my screen. So, right.
That's great, David. We can see that.
That's up. Okay, good stuff. Okay, so our research using LEO data was looking at the association between curriculum breadth in the 16 to 19 phase. So the diversity of A-level subjects typically, the association between that and employment outcomes. So the background to this research was that there'd been some previous research looking at the relationship between breadth and employment outcomes, but it was based on survey data, which among other limitations, so the amount you could control for different subjects, sample sizes, etc., limited the robustness of that research. And actually it was quite old now, that research as well. So what we wanted to look at was the relationship between subject diversity and employment outcomes, but also how that subject diversity has changed over time. So we undertook this project in partnership with the Royal Society, and we published a report in autumn last year. So the first bit that we looked at was looking at how subject diversity has changed in recent years. And this was more traditional national pupil database research. We didn't actually look at the employment outcomes, weren't part of this first bit. What we found was that the percentage of students taking qualifications from 3 or more subject areas has reduced massively in recent years, with a half since 2010 and a 14 percentage point fall since 2016. We found that this fall was in turn due to a fall in the number of qualifications taken, which in turn was due to a fall in the number of AS level qualifications taken due to changes in qualifications policy, in particular whether or not an AS level counted towards a full A level, and also funding cuts in the 16 to 19 phase over this time, with more and more institutions just offering typically 3 A levels as standard. And then moving on to the bit of research we did looking at employment outcomes, just a tiny bit on the methodology here. We were looking at annual earnings and sustained employment or education. We were using some of the standardized measures of employment and education that the department provided as part of the LEO data. And we were looking at students who were in year 13 in 2008-9 and 26 in the 16-17 tax year. So as Jenna was mentioning, there's not only is some of this data in terms of employment outcomes quite old, but there's a big lag between when these students were undertaking their education and the employment outcomes themselves. And we were only considering those who completed an undergraduate degree, so as not to conflate sort of amount of time in the labour market with other elements of the research. Our models conditioned on some of the usual factors, personal characteristics, disadvantage, ethnicity, gender, etc., as well as actual results. And in the 16 to 19 phase, we wanted to control for subject so that we weren't actually picking up sort of subject effects, a number of qualifications entered as well. We also conditioned on higher education as subjects and selectivity of institution, which I will come back to if someone has a question on that, or we have time. So just looking at the raw difference in employment outcomes, earnings by breadth score. So you can see breadth score across the bottom there, with those who are taking subjects from more areas on the right, less areas on the left. And you can see that for both men and women, more breadth equals higher average annual earnings. But as you can see with the point on the left, on the far right there, most of that difference is explained by student characteristics and results and subjects taken. But nevertheless, once we controlled for all of those factors, we found that there was a return to breadth of around 3 to 4%. So seemingly quite small, but noticeable, not insignificant. As you can see from this chart here, there was a return to some subject breadth. So what I mean by that is moving from one subject, so only taking qualifications in one subject area to two, saw increased earnings of around 3 to 4%, but moving from 2 to 3 or 4 or 5 didn't see the same increases. So the returns here seem small on first inspection, but it's worth noting a few points. The full models, including all the student characteristics we have, all the information on educational attainment at all the different phases, only accounted for around 1/5 of the variation in earnings, which actually really surprised us at first, how small we were able to account for the differences in earnings. Some of the reasons we think that might have been, we were only looking at those who had gone through higher education, so which we know, of course, is associated with improved employment outcomes. So we'd already removed some of the variation in the full population. The LEO data doesn't include anything on hours worked, so we can't control for part-time work. And of course, there's unmeasured factors such as soft skills and access to social networks, which also influence employment outcomes. But most critically, and relating to some of what Jenna was saying previously, we were considering returns quite early on in a working life, at age 26. And we know for some factors, the importance of them continues to increase with age. And it's also worth pointing out that actually for whether or not a young person went on to be in sustained employment or education, there didn't seem to be the same relationship with breadth. So a few thoughts on our experiences working with the LEO data. As I said, we were initially surprised how much the LEO data, everything we know about education outcomes and student characteristics, actually explained the variation in employment outcomes. There's a conflict between the relevance of the system as it is now and the data, the lag of the LEO data and longer term effects of different characteristics, which makes interpreting some of the findings tricky. We found the analysis quite straightforward actually, but we were working with some of the standardized DFE measures. We weren't creating the employment measures from scratch, for example. I will say that we found the DFE Leo team excellent in assisting with this research. And the pilot application, though it did go on for a little bit, we actually found it relatively straightforward. We're currently going through what is now standard application process, which I think is a bit trickier, not least that the different data owners seem to have slightly different standards. And of course, whilst with a lot of organizations moving to sort of hybrid working models, Leo data can only be accessed from office environments rather than from home. So I think that is just one sort of potential restriction on future Leo research. Which brings me to the end.
That's great, David. Thank you so much for that. Really good to kind of move from that area of kind of longer term destination measures into this one of curriculum breadth. And just say a little bit more about kind of your thoughts about, I guess, the policy implications of this research, and in particular, kind of this whole question that I know we've talked about quite a lot together before about kind of, you know, breadth and breadth of opportunity really in that space.
Yeah, so we think that a large driver, of course, of this was, as I mentioned, was both the decoupling of AS levels and A levels, and also funding as well. And the funding formula actually restricting sort of additional, there wasn't additional funding for small qualifications. So if someone wanted to do 3 A levels and an AS level, they didn't necessarily get more funding than those doing 3 A levels. So I think it is we did recommend that the government look again at the funding formula and the incentives around that for small qualifications, particularly those in different subject areas. I mean, there is a much bigger question here about the breadth of curriculum, the structure of A levels in the 16 to 19 phase. But to be honest, I don't think that's one that's easily solved in isolation without looking at GCSEs and everything else. I think that's probably a much bigger discussion than we have time for.
That's really helpful, David. So just to let the audience know what's happening with the questions, obviously we're not going to get through all of them live, but my fabulous colleagues from NFER are already answering some of the ones we didn't get to on the previous session in writing, and some of the bigger questions that people are asking we're going to leave for the panel session at the end. So don't worry, we're keeping track of all those and we're going to make use of them. There were a couple of more kind of technical questions, David, on your side. So Ian had asked in the chat whether your analysis only covers pupils who went on to complete a first degree rather than all pupils.
Yeah, it did. We did actually start our modelling looking at all students, but because those who didn't go on to complete a first degree will have had more time in the labour market, it conflated some of the results. So we decided to, for simplicity's sake, to focus on those who'd completed an undergraduate degree. I think there's a really valid bit of analysis that could be done, for example, looking at longer term employment outcomes, which weren't so soon after those completing a degree had completed their degree, or indeed to look at just those who hadn't gone to university, but that wasn't part of this research.
That's really helpful, David. And one other technical one was just whether you included geographical areas in your models.
We did. Well, we had controls for region. I don't think we had any kind of urban rural controls or anything like that, but certainly for government office region.
That's really helpful. And one more technical one, just about private schools. And this one's also for Jenna. If you wouldn't mind answering in the chat, that would be fabulous. But Andy was just asking about the MPD not including private schools. Was that an issue for this piece of research as well?
Yeah. I mean, the issue with private schools is whilst private school students, I think whilst we have their GCSE results and their A-level results, we don't have the full set of student characteristics, which of course, is quite important when we know the influence of those different characteristics. So we excluded students, private school students, as part of our analysis.
That's really helpful. I wanted to just take it broader again. I know this goes kind of beyond the analysis, but obviously there've been quite a lot of calls from recent kind of commissions about kind of baccalaureates, kind of IB, going back to Tomlinson. So yeah, obviously the data doesn't tell us the answer to that, but from your kind of wider thinking, David, what's your kind of perspective on that element of breadth?
So, I mean, we're straying into opinion here away from my sort of evidence-based research. I mean, I do think there is an argument for a greater breadth in the 16 to 19 phase for some of the reasons that we've seen here. But you know, we are an outlier in England in terms of the narrowness of our curriculum, which originally was set up largely as a sort of stepping stone to university. So I think that there are strong arguments, but as I said, I think you then need, and particularly with the raising of the participation age as well, I think you really need to look at the whole sort of 11 plus, really 11 through to 18 system again. And I think there are arguments for greater breadth the whole way through.
Great, really helpful perspective, David, and thank you for caveating that, making sure that we're being clear about which bits are evidence-based and which are kind of broader thoughts. We've got time for one more question, which Frank's asked in the chat, which is just about whether that kind of positive response to breadth is due to art students doing maths or science as opposed to kind of breadth in the broadest sense. So just wanted to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I think if we were to spend more time on this, I think we would spend more time looking at particular combinations of subjects. So what we did have in this was subject-specific controls. So, you know, if there are greater returns to maths, for example, then we would have largely controlled for that. But what we didn't do is then say, well, are there particular combinations which are better and particular combinations which are worse? So we didn't look at arts and maths specifically, but we did try and control for individual subject effects.
Great, thank you so much, David. Time for you to imagine the crowd going wild as you step down off the virtual stage. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm going to welcome now Sandra McNally, who is the Director of the Centre for Vocational Education Research, an area that's dear to our heart here at Edge. So Sandra, very, very welcome, and I know you're going to share your slides. Perfect. We can see the slides, Sandra, but I think you're on mute at the second.
You would think that I would be well able to do this at this stage in the.
It wouldn't be a Zoom webinar with that.
No, I'm finding it difficult to share. I want to share the whole screen, but seem to.
If you just click from beginning, just near where your mouse was there, that should.
Oh yes,
that should set you off.
Yeah, just got it there. Yes, I do this all the time. I don't know why I'm getting flustered. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. Okay, I'm at the University of Surrey, but also, as Ali said, at the Centre for Vocational Education Research and the Centre for Economic Performance. So, just to say this, CEVR was a Centre for Vocational Education Research was funded.
Sandra, sorry to cut in, but for some reason we're not seeing your slides. We've just got the kind of prep screen rather than your full set of slides.
I don't know what's going on in that case.
It's absolutely fine. I'm going to suggest, because we're tight on time, I'm going to ask Jay to join me, and if you email me your slides, we'll get our Edge Tech team to put them up for you while you're speaking after Jay, and then you can just speak freely.
Well, you want me to email them now?
Yep, let's go for it live, and I'll just bring Jay onto the
Okay.
virtual stage next, and we'll just switch the order around slightly,
Okay,
just because I want you to feel confident.
Okay, that's fine.
So Jay, do you want to join me? A little bit earlier than expected, but I know you're more than willing to cope with a bit of flexibility.
Yeah.
Jay Karmas is from the Unit for Future Skills at the Department for Education. So Jay, we'll hear from you next, and Sandra, I'll pick up your slides in a second.
I'll just share my screen.
That's great. We can see that, Jay.
Okay, good. Okay, so yeah, as Ollie just said, I'm a statistician in the Unit for Future Skills, and we're a new kind of bit of DFE that's just been set up to improve the quality and the availability of skills and jobs data, and also to try and make a lot of this data more accessible. So I was going to give a brief overview of one of the kind of bits of work that we included in our launch a few weeks ago, and that's something that we called the Career Pathways Dashboard, and an associated statistical publication that we published alongside that. And I'll start by giving a a quick overview of this, and I'll say a bit about the data, and then I'll finish with a short demonstration of the dashboard itself, if we've got time. Okay, so what do I mean about the career pathways work? So if you look at the right-hand side of this slide, what you can see is a summary of some user research that was undertaken by National Careers Service. And what this is kind of showing, I think, is that there's a demand from young students, careers advisors, from parents as well, for better information and better data around careers, and particularly data and information that helps them to understand the available routes into different careers, and also that helps them narrow down their options once they select a career of interest. And what we wanted to do with this work is kind of explore whether we could use the longitudinal education outcomes study to fill some of the gaps in information that have been identified here. And a very recent expansion in the LEO data set was kind of a really good opportunity for us to do this. So very recently, LEO's been expanded to bring in the industry sector of work that students move into. So we're now able to look at the sector that people work in and link that back to the kind of qualification achievements data that was kind of a really rich section of LEO already. And that's essentially what this work is about. So we're aiming to explore whether LEO can help us to understand education pathways that employees in different industry sectors have taken. And we also wanted to try and demonstrate how LEO data could be used to potentially develop a kind of careers information tool. And we've demonstrated this using an interactive dashboard that we built in our Shiny. Okay, so just a little bit about the data and what it does and doesn't tell us that we've put together. So I think it's important to stress that this data really helps us understand employees and the choices that employees have made in their education. It's about employees, the industry sectors they work in, and the qualifications they've achieved to kind of get there, and the associated earnings. So what we started with is individuals in LEO who are of age 25 to 30 in the 18-19 tax year, and this is restricted to individuals who are schooled in England, and also who have an education record in the National Pupil Database. And those conditions are kind of just part of working with the LEO dataset in this way. We've also restricted it to people who are in sustained PAYE employment, so we don't include self-employment here. It's just not in the data in the way that we can use it at the moment, so there's not much else we can do. We're stripping out people who were in higher education in 18-19 and still studying, and we're also stripping out anybody that we couldn't match to an industry sector, because this work is about sectors really. So just a quick bit on what this doesn't show. So this analysis is not helping us to understand outcomes associated with study in FE or HE. There's already many statistical publications that are doing this. It's also not looking at destinations post college or school. Again, there's publications that do this, and it's not a total kind of survey of employment across the different industry sectors. This is already published by ONS, and for the reasons that I've outlined in the data that we're working with, it's not possible to do that using LEO. So just to give you an idea of what this data looks like, so these are just two screen grabs from the publication, and on the left hand side it's focusing on employees in the construction sector here. So you can just see a simple chart that's showing the most common qualifications held by construction employees in 18-19. You can see the electrotechnical apprenticeship is top, followed by construction skills apprenticeship at level 2 and level 3, and then a first degree in building is the third most popular one. The chart on the right is a kind of recasting of similar data, so we just ordered it by the highest paid this time, and you can see that it's first degree in planning, urban and rural that is the highest paid, followed by the first degree in building that we saw on the chart on the left. So that's just a quick indication of the kind of things that you can do with this data. So it's about employees in different sectors and the kind of rich information that we've got about their qualification achievements. So before I move on to talk about the dashboard, this is ongoing work and we've got some planned out next steps with it. So the first thing that we really want to do is to gather as much feedback as we possibly can about this, and in particular we want to make the data as useful as it can be for the purpose of kind of helping people make better decisions about the qualifications they choose to do in terms of the careers they want to pursue, and we kind of want as much feedback as we can get to develop this in new ways in the future. Occupation data is also something that we're thinking about. Obviously, we've chosen to look at sectors at the moment because this is what we can do. But in an ideal world, we would want to include occupation in this because occupation is more closely linked to the skills and qualifications that people have than sector is. So it's a big limitation at the moment. We're also thinking about how we can link this with other sources. So the course directory is something, and how we can build in kind of more detailed sub-regional aspects to this analysis, because at the moment we've just focused on region as our kind of regional window into this data. Okay, so I'll just switch the screen that I'm sharing. Hopefully this has worked. Can you see that?
We can still see your next steps, Jay.
Okay.
You might just need to stop sharing screen and then, yeah, perfect.
Hopefully that's worked this time.
Yeah, that's great. We can see that.
Okay, so hopefully what you're looking at is the landing page to our dashboard. And this just contains some of the information that I've already gone through. There's two main tabs that we put together. So the first one is something called Industry Sector Overview. And this is where we've kind of put all of the key bits of data on qualifications and earnings and things like that. So the kind of main takeaway from this is on the left-hand side of the dashboard, you can select the industry you're working in or you're interested in. So I could select IT, you select the region that you're living in. So I live in Yorkshire and the Humber, so I'll select that. And then the dashboard will present a bunch of information about employees in this sector that should kind of make it much clearer about the education choices that these employees have made. So you can see 2.5% of the workforce are working in IT. You can see their average earnings, 26,000. And you can see that IT is going to be a growing sector over the next 5 years in Yorkshire and the Humber. You can also see some more detailed breakdowns of these numbers. So this is showing that the higher your qualification level when you enter employment, the higher your earnings. So that's not unexpected, but that's particular to the IT sector here. You can also see a breakdown of the kind of subsectors within IT. So you can see computer programming and consultancy pays better than telecommunications for these employees. And what I think I'll finish on is you can then choose to look at the really detailed qualification data that sits underneath this. So you can see for IT in Yorkshire and Humber, the most popular qualification that employees hold is a degree in computer science. So about 7% of employees hold that, and you can see the earnings that are associated with it. You can also see just below that some level 3 apprenticeship sub-degree routes. So IT and telecoms professionals and IT software and web telecoms professional apprenticeships. So you can see that there are some sub-degree entry routes into employment in the IT sector here. We've tried to make this as kind of interactive as possible, so you can drill down into the different subsectors, and you can also select the level of education that you're interested in. So if you don't want to go to university, you can choose to look at level 3 qualifications, and that's what you'll see. I think in the interest of time, I'll stop there. stop.
That was
sharing my
great,
screen.
Jay. Thank you very much. I'm really, really excited about this work. We looked at something not dissimilar that was done in Northern Ireland a few years ago, and it was making such a difference to kind of young people and careers advisors. I think when I spoke to one careers advisor recently, they described trying to find information as like trying to take a drink from a fire hose. Like there's just so much out there, which is great, but actually kind of the work you're doing to simplify it and make it really clear, I think is equally valuable. We've got a few kind of questions that have come in, some technical and some wider. So Jenny's asked about whether this data needs to be seen in the context of the wider labour market, and in particular other constraints like caps on training in particular subjects.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and we do want to kind of expand out that we want to link this up with other sources in the future, and that's something that we're interested in doing. The things that are on our mind, vacancy data and local labour market information is something else. But also we want to link it to resources that are more in the career space, like course directories and prospectuses and things like that. So yeah, we haven't thought that much about this stuff yet, but it's definitely something that we are thinking about.
Yeah, that's really exciting, Jay. I think the more linkages, the better. And if there's anything we can do to help, certainly from Edge, please let us know. I think it's really valuable, but it's only going to be as valuable as how accessible it is to kind of busy careers advisors and others. Tammy's asked about excluding people in HE, and in particular those who might be in HE and at the same time kind of studying part-time.
Yeah, so we made the choice to strip out employees who are still studying in HE. I think partly to kind of it's a data cleaning point really, because people who are still studying and are working alongside that potentially they haven't entered the career that they want to pursue in the long term yet. So a simple decision was to strip them out of this analysis, and that's what we've done.
That's helpful. And with the split by area, is that the area in which the person now works or where they went to school?
It's the area where they currently live. So that's the data that's in the Leo study currently. So it's where they're currently living.
Perfect. And one more, just to keep you on your toes, Jay. What's the time frame on the average earnings? Gemma's asked.
So it's their earnings over the 18-19 financial year. So we've annualized it where the time period was shorter. So it's earnings over the full financial year.
That's perfect. Jay, thank you so much. It's really exciting work, and I think it's going to make a huge difference. We're going to be joined later by Frank, who is heading up the Future Skills unit. So we'll be able to tell us a little bit more about the broader program. But Jay, thank you so much. It's really, really helpful.
Thank you. Cheers, Ollie.
Sandra, we're going to welcome you back, and my colleague Lulu is going to share your slides. So you'll have to do a Chris Whitty impression and just let us know when you want the next slide. But otherwise, we'll do that remotely.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience. Yeah, we can just move on. Thank you. Next slide. Yeah, so I just wanted to say, under the Centre for Vocational Education Research, that is a consortium. It was funded by DFE between 2015 and 2020. We had privileged access to Leo really because we were working directly for the department. So we've used Leo in lots of projects over many years. Some of the projects are ongoing, and we have some we're keeping CEVR going, even though it's not funded by DFE in that way anymore. And we're doing some new projects. We're going to have a new paper about apprenticeships out soon, and we're evaluating skills boot camps for DFE, for example, which will involve use of Leo. Next slide, please. I don't think you need me to explain what Leo is, because that's already being done, but I just want to make the point that strict arrangements are in place to observe the requirements of the Data Protection Act, and the anonymized data can only be used by researchers under strict conditions and is in a secure setting. And it's an important point to make, because it's obviously quite a sensitive data, and it is impossible to access the data just because you're interested in it. You have to have meet a lot of conditions for it. Next slide, please. So we have used Leo in a lot of projects. Our outputs to date are 37 discussion papers and 13 briefing notes, and many of those used Leo. So I encourage people to have a look at the profile of things there if they're interested in seeing how this data has been used. Some of the themes of our work have been looking at descriptive trends in vocational education, such as post-16 progression pathways. And Leo is particularly useful for that, because you can really drill down at a very disaggregate level, as we've also seen in some of the other presentations. We've also looked at what influences decisions in vocational education, what is the impact of vocational qualifications and apprenticeships on employment and earnings. We have done more analytical work like evaluating the value added of FE colleges and looking at the influence of inputs such as management practices, leadership, capital expenditure, and we've evaluated university technical colleges as well. Next slide, please. So the topic I wanted to take for this very short presentation was actually a briefing note that we did for DFE with colleagues at IFS, where we've both been working for DFE on looking at earnings differentials attributable to post-18 qualifications. This is just a very simple study that I think illustrates both the strengths and limitations of analysis using administrative data. Next slide, please. So what we did in this case was looked at people who did their GCSEs between 2002 and 2006, who had 5 good GCSEs and a level 3 qualification by age 19. Then we looked at their post-compulsory record and earnings data available for in-state schools only. And the object is to look at what's the earnings differential to level 4, level 5, level 6 relative to level 3. It excludes lots of people because a lot of people come to it later. Actually, doing it part-time is a huge issue, particularly for level 4 and level 5 qualifications. People do come back and do these things, and they do part-time work at the same time. Next slide, please. So the question that we've been looking at, as I said, is what's the earnings differential for an individual's highest level of qualification after taking account of predetermined characteristics that are observed in the data and comparable across different learners. Now, many of you will think of this as looking at estimating returns. Returns is, we think, using quite causal language. It's only causal under very strong assumptions, and that goes for a lot of the sorts of analysis that has been done on LEO to date. For this purpose, we're ignoring dropout and non-completion because of the complexity of doing that, but that's a big issue as well, and it's a very big research issue. Next slide, please. So this slide shows you just the numbers of people doing level 4, level 5 foundation degrees and level 6. And this illustrates a great thing about LEO. You can see that the vast majority of people in our sample are doing level 6. They're not doing level 4, level 5 or foundation degrees. And this is the percentage of people doing those things is really, really small. And the beauty of LEO is that because you've got the census, you can look at these things properly, whereas you probably couldn't do it as well in survey data because you've just observed too few people doing level 4 or level 5 qualifications. And it's not uncommon to combine qualifications and to go from one to the other. Next slide, please. Another nice thing we can do is we can look at the GCSE profiles of people who pursue different qualifications. And the really interesting thing here is the people who do level 3 and stop with their education at that point have a very similar GCSE profile to those doing level 4, level 5 or foundation degrees. But they look really different from the average person going to university to do a degree. That's a level 6 qualification, who tends to be from higher up the range, higher up the GCSE range. So when you're thinking about who's doing these things, actually the people who are doing university degrees look pretty different from people doing level 4 or level 5 degrees even before they start. Next slide, please. The other thing to notice, again, another really good thing about this data is that you can see what exactly people are doing within these qualifications. And you can see that within level 4, level 5 qualifications, the popular ones are very concentrated. For example, DIP HE in nursing is 92% of learners taking that qualification, level 5 qualification, are female. The percentage of learners in each level taking that qualification is 50%. So, that's level 5, 50% are DIP HE in nursing, and of those, almost all of them are women. Next slide, please. And this is what we were doing. We were just estimating the earnings differential attached to somebody's qualification at age 26 and age 30. And the blue line is when we weren't putting in any other controls, and the red line is when we're putting in all the controls like GCSE and demographics. And a lot of the time, it doesn't make that much difference. It makes most difference when you're actually looking at level 6, because GCSE scores are so different for people doing level 6 compared to level 3. That's why that is. And you can see from this graph is that everybody on the slide, on the whatever combination of things people do, it's the earnings differential is always considerably higher than stopping your education at a level 3, so an A level or equivalent qualification. Next slide, please. And the same is true for women. We don't have to dwell on that. Next slide, please. So what do we learn? Very briefly. All higher level qualifications are associated with better earnings outcomes relative to finishing education at level 3. And might surprise people to know that when you're comparing these different higher qualifications to each other, at level 5, women earn most from completing that qualification by age 26, and men have the highest earning differential for level 4. Now, a lot of this is because the results are heavily determined by specific subject areas at level 4 and 5. So you cannot say, based on this analysis, that you should massively expand level 4 and level 5 qualifications across a broad range of subject areas. And you can't assume that they would have similar results. Next slide, please. So what does this illustrate more broadly? As I mentioned, you can look at these issues that huge administrative data allow you to analyze issues at a high level of disaggregation, even when the absolute number of people involved is relatively small. And the possibility of including some controls is incredibly useful because we can control for confounders like GCSE scores when looking at earnings differentials, for example. But I would stress, just because a data set is large does not mean that it more easily facilitates causal statements. Methodology matters for that, and some research questions are inherently more difficult than others. And I think this particular research question is really quite difficult. So I would say it's really important to think of LEO, to use it alongside other resources that are available to the research community, like longitudinal data sets, for example. Not as saying one is better than the other, but saying both are useful. And if you want to answer a research question more fully, sometimes you have to use more than one data set. I noticed that there are some questions on the chat, for example, about health. And health isn't something that you can use using just LEO, but you would be able to look at similar questions using other data sets. Then I would really also emphasize that the oldest cohort in LEO is young for making earnings comparisons for people with different qualifications, because we know for sure, based on other analysis, that trajectories change a lot over people's 30s and 40s. So just because somebody earns a lot in construction or whatever it is at 30 is not a fair representation of what they're going to be earning relative to other things over their lifetime. So that's just one big caution I would have, even about the the information that you give people. I think you need to try and help people understand that it's not all about what you're earning at age 30, because people have very different work experience. If you do level 4, level 5 qualifications, those people will have a lot more work experience than people doing level 6 by age 30, and it means their earnings are going to be lower than people who have higher qualifications at that point in time, and that will change in the next 10 years. So that's just, I think that's really, really important for people to understand when they're looking at earnings differentials. And I'll stop there.
That's great, Sandra. Thank you so much for sharing that. I wanted to start off with, I guess, something that probably comes up in quite a lot of analysis in this area, the question of kind of income as a main kind of focus, particularly for post-18 qualifications. And obviously some subjects, particularly in the kind of creative space, aren't necessarily linked to great income, but they might be linked to great outcomes. How have you kind of managed that through CEVA's wider work?
I mean, you have to look at other data sets and look at other frameworks. I mean, if you're going to think about it in that way. I mean, LEO is good for answering particular questions and not good for others. So I would say one thing that would really help, I think, in LEO is to be able to link it somehow to people's industry or occupation. Because really, for that question that you're asking about creative industries, it would be nice to know how many people actually doing that subject end up in something that's relevant to their qualification, which might indicate there's sort of non-pecuniary aspects to doing it. At least you can get a job in the area that you're interested in, and maybe that has a sort of compensating differential. But if they're ending up not working in that at all and working in some other other occupations, then it might not be such good news. So for that particular question, I think that would be useful to know.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Sandra. Guy has asked a great question about, you know, if people who are speaking on the webinar today had a magic wand, what would they include? So that's a great answer, and I'm going to ask that to the wider panelists in a little while as well. So I suspect that'll be quite high up on everyone's lists.
Okay, the other thing I would say on that is just, you know, health warning is that we don't have hours of work. Administrative data never has hours of work, so you don't know whether someone's working part-time or not. And for looking at women's earnings and employment in particular, that can be very important.
A really important point. And I just wanted to pick up that point you made about kind of income trajectories changing, particularly a bit later on than we're measuring here. Do you think that the whole kind of shift in the labour market and people having more careers and kind of maybe bouncing around between things is going to make that even more of a challenge in future?
Well, not for answering the question. You know, if you're looking at what are the returns to particular qualifications, ideally you want to be looking at that over someone's working life. So at the moment, the only way you can do that is to use Leo and use other things like the labour force survey, for example. That's one of the things you'd be interested in knowing is whether particular courses, qualifications allow people to be more resilient to shocks in the labour market. So for example, we have COVID. Some people will be able to transition more easily to other jobs or occupations than others. And you want to know that because that's part of the return. That's part of what makes a qualification good or not. So it's not just the job after the job on entry to the labour market that matters, but also how that qualification, that education equips you for the whole working life and for future training as well.
Sandra, thank you so much, and thank you to Jay and to Jenna and to David as well for those great presentations and for working hard in the chat as well. I've seen people answering lots of questions behind the scenes as well. So yeah, huge thanks for that. We're going to move into the second part of our discussion now and kind of zoom out a little bit. And I'm going to introduce each of our 4 panelists in turn and ask them to kind of join us and just say a little bit about their work in relation to Leo or their role in relation to Leo, and just share, to keep it nice and positive, one reflection about what they see as the biggest opportunity from the Leo data. So Alistair Smith, I'm going to welcome to the virtual stage first. Al is Head of Research Evidence and Engagement at DFE.
Hi, thanks, Ollie. So yeah, as you said, I work in a central research team in DFE. So my interest in Leo is more focused on what we do with it rather than what it is, though obviously those are very important interlinkages. And there have been questions around why haven't we done anything with health here, or why haven't we answered these other questions? What about occupation? So I think some of my interests are around how do we bring in those other data linkages, and I'll be working with others also on this platform to think about not only how Leo could be expanded, but also what other sorts of data we might want to draw on. So there's eChild, which is a data linked DFE linked data to health data information. There's an ONS owned data set called Growing Up in England, or GUI, which links education data with a whole range of census data. So if you want to look at explorations around place-based questions, so there's lots of things we can do. So my main interests are actually understanding across all of the department's policy interests, what are our research and data opportunities and how do we bring those together? So in terms of the greatest opportunity, I think getting in occupation codes would be one of the greatest, because if you can start to map what people actually did to what their jobs actually are, as well as earnings, and especially if you can then sneakily add in a second opportunity, which is bringing in longitudinal survey data, if we can start to map on people's choices as well as their pathways and routes, I think we could have a really powerful set of probably 2 or 3 lifetimes worth of analysis there. Thank you.
That's great, Al. You're very welcome, and thank you for picking that up. That's really, really important. I must say this area has some great acronyms. So yeah, Leo GUI is a new one on me, so thank you for sharing that one. Can I welcome to the stage next Karen Powell, who's Head of Research Strategy and Commissioning at ADR UK. Karen.
Hi, thanks Ollie very much, and great to follow Al because we're working super closely. So yeah, I'm at ADR UK and we're really about curating long-term cross-cutting research resources by linking administrative data and making them securely available to the wider academic community so we can unlock relevant and useful policy and practice insights that are relevant for the real world. And so although we haven't funded the creation of LEO, we are funding the ONS Secure Research Service. So back to what Sandra was saying, that's where the standard extract of LEO currently is securely accessible now for all accredited researchers under the Digital Economy Act and the 5 Safes framework. So it's that I'm really excited about, that, you know, research access to LEO has been simplified now and it's more accessible to more researchers than ever before. And so now this milestone's been reached, I'm really interested in thinking about how we can really make sure we're getting the best of that data, you know, especially for the benefit of our children and young people. So my role is really focusing on England related data linkages, including those that Al was just talking about. So I've kind of got a keen eye as well on our overall strategy and other aspects that are going to drive up really useful research. And so along with my co-lead Emily Oliver, like I really want to understand the structures and the systems across the board that are going to help us get to the point where more researchers are aware of this data, are more aware of the potential of the data, that there's a growing array of research opportunities to draw on, and that there's the training and the data documentation and the resources available so researchers have what they need to be able to plan and deliver really insightful research projects. And ultimately, you know, work towards growing and supporting a diverse and skilled community of researchers that are generating research in a sustained and engaged way. And all of that, you know, I see us absolutely doing in collaboration with academia and government, public policy stakeholders, the public, data owners, and continuing our working relationship with DFE. So my reflection on LEO and a big opportunity there. Like, I think it would be amazing if we can work together to really sort of set out a shared policy and practice research agenda, you know, mapping in the insights that are already out there in the research that's being done, and invite the academic community to respond to that and build an accumulating body of knowledge that, you know, over time can really be a powerful evidence base, I think, to inform what works to improve the longer term outcomes and the futures of our children and young people.
Great aspiration, Karen, thank you. And Karen and I had the pleasure of working together quite a while ago now. And I also had the pleasure of working with Frank, who's our next guest. Frank Bowley's head of the Unit for Future Skills in DFE. Frank.
Wonderful, thank you. So first of all, I should say, before I'm the head of Unit for Future Skills. Before that, I was head of the FE analytical and team. And about 10 years ago, when I started the job, someone came up with me, which was the FE match data set, which was the FE and the tax data matched together, which evolved into LEO. And I've been involved with LEO for 10 years, and it's amazing what we've managed to do with that, which is both supported a lot of the investment into apprenticeships, FE and everything, and I think underpinning a lot of the reforms that came in the white paper a year or so ago, things like the expansion of level 4 and 5, which completely accept Sandra's sort of cautions, but the sort of analysis like that helps to sort of convince us that investment in 4 or 5 is important. But UFS, I mean, UFS has been set up by the Secretary of State, and he asked us to say, can we give him up more data about, answers questions about where the skills mismatches, where do we have lots of supply and demand of skills, trends in that which they're not matching up, and where the skills gaps, but also give much more information about what are the pathways into good jobs, and also whether our policies are working to give people more training that get people into good jobs. And we went up to him and said, generally, LEO will be where we start. It's a great resource, and the work that Jay presented was very much, if we didn't have LEO, we wouldn't be able to do that. So we started a good place. I put a website up. Please go to that, look at the dashboards, get the data, and then tell us what more you want us to do. There is a website, there's an email box there, and give us suggestions about where this works and where this doesn't work. And we'll carry on building our new tools on that. And we're going to have workshops in the future where we're going to invite researchers. So if you're interested in coming to these workshops, please let us know. But to answer your question, what we'd ask for, I mean, occupations is a clear thing we want to add for. We also, people have mentioned things like hours worked, so we can understand part-time and short and not part-time time work. Get more timely data, because all the data we've had is 2 or 3 years old, and make that more timely. And we work with HMRC at the moment and other things to get those. So we should hope in the next few months that we should have some consultation. HMRC might put some consultation about collecting occupational data and then making it available. Please, people, look out for it. It'll be a big change in tax. Lots of businesses quite reasonably will say, why do we need to give occupational data? So we need to have a strong case about why occupational data is required for us to convince politicians, again, quite reasonably, that it's worth collecting this data. If it's not collected, it's going to be a big change. So we need your support on that one. But other things we could ask for, I mean, we need better work information, jobs, skills demand. I saw some questions were saying, do we have things on demand? So we need better information on that. ONS is about to start publishing job vacancy data, which will have occupations at a regional and sub-regional level. So we should hopefully bring that into Leo. Other things with the thing, if we start doing things like occupations and job demand, we need to find a way of linking all these things together. Leo is based on individuals, but we're going to do demand that's based on jobs. So we'll need things like skills taxonomies and better occupation, jobs, qualification mapping. And we're hoping to start putting a proposal out in the next couple of weeks, month or two, which will looking for partners to help us think about how we can develop better taxonomies and better mapping, so it can actually be used to bring all this demand, supply, qualification, skills data together into a more sort of consistent, holistic model. Whether that's Leo, I mean, it's always, it goes beyond just Leo, but it's part of that whole matched admin data set, which we're hoping to produce over the next couple of years.
Thank you so much. Very welcome, Frank, and congratulations on your new role. And last but not least, Jude Hillary, who is Head of Systems and Optimal Pathways Portfolios at NFER. Jude.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm super pleased to be here. Thanks very much for inviting me. As I said, Ollie says, I work for NFER. Our mission is to generate evidence and insights which can be used to improve outcomes for future generations everywhere and to support positive change for education systems. I guess I'm very much I come here as a user of a Leo. That was a question I was asked. As you've heard from Jen, my colleague earlier, we've used Leo to develop a new longer term destination measures with EDGE. And we're going to certainly go on and use it to look at the demand for future skills, which I'll say a bit more about later. So we're very much a user of this data. However, it's not always been so. I also used to be head of statistics and data in the Department for Education about 7 years ago, where I used to work with Frank on actually developing Leo. So I suppose at one time I was a supplier too. So I've got a bit of a history with this thing. In terms of sharing one reflection on the biggest opportunity, of course, the danger of coming last is you end up saying the same thing as everybody else. But I wanted to sort of start by actually giving a huge shout out to DFE actually for the development of their new graduate industry dashboard release, which I think is fascinating. And if you haven't looked at it, you really should. It's really worth a look. It's exactly the sorts of things that we were intending to happen with Leo several years ago when it was being developed. So it's really good to see it. In terms of opportunities going forward, really excited to hear from Frank about his developments about getting occupational data onto Leo and hopefully ours work too, because I think those would be two really, really important developments. It's worth also bearing in mind, though, as I kind of said in the chat earlier, that we shouldn't get completely obsessed by pay outcomes, because that's not the only way that we judge the value of what young people end up doing in the labour market. There are other factors, certainly when we're thinking about destinations, which might be deemed as being important in determining successful destinations, such as value of the job to society and individual well-being. And it might be sort of well downstream in terms of sort of thinking about further data developments we could do, but if there was some stuff that we could do on that in terms of general well-being, then that would be really, really good too. But the thing I wanted to really talk about was actually, I spend an awful lot of time thinking about the future at the moment, and particularly the future of the labour market. So the global economy is going to face some significant shifts in the coming decades, as the impact of new technologies coupled with demographic and environmental changes, it's all going to have an impact on the future labour market. And it's not just on the jobs that will be available, but also the skills that will be needed to do those jobs. And I'm working with a big team, including a number of leading academics, one of which is on the call, I see, to look at this, what the impact will be in the next 10 to 15 years and beyond. And I think the LEO dataset is going to be really, really important in helping us to understand how people transition from education to employment, and also how they move around once they're in the labour market, and help us to come up with ideas, so we can sort of think about how we prepare for this sort of coming challenge where we have to deal with a very different labour market to what we have now. So I'll shut up there.
That's absolutely great. Thank you so much, all four of you, for joining us for those really helpful initial reflections. I've got quite a few little areas that I want to touch on, so I'm going to ask you to be quite quick fire with your responses. But one that you touched on already, Karen, but I just wanted to really clarify for colleagues on the call, because there are a few questions around it, just about getting access to the data. So particularly for smaller charities who might not have all the security classifications, would that be about working in partnership like we have with NFER? And where would kind of organisations go to kind of start their LEO journey? Karen, and then maybe Al, you might want to come in as well.
Yeah, so I think via the ONS SRS, the data is available to all accredited researchers. So providing you can become an accredited researcher, then that works. And then your project has to be in the public good. And so this is related to the 5 Safes framework. Maybe I'll see if I can get a link in the chat.
That would be perfect, Karen. Al, did you want to add anything on data access? You're on mute at the second.
Thank you. Similarly, the department is working to streamline routes of access. So as Karen said, most of the big link data will go on the ONS SRS and a trusted research environment, the basis of that sharing is under the Digital Economies Act. Where data requests fall outside of that act, or therefore more specific DFE data, we would look to process those data requests ourselves. Again, as Karen said, I'll also have to find a link because it's not really my area of business, but I know there is a web page for requests for asking for DFE data.
Much appreciated. That's absolutely great. One of the other big areas that some of you have touched on already, and I think Frank maybe is out of wishes already, but thinking about kind of areas that we might wish to add into the LEO database, occupational classifications clearly come out as one of them, but I just wanted to give the others the opportunity to kind of flag any others. Frank, was there anything else you want to reflect on that?
No, I should mention someone has going back to occupations. I mean, census and ASH will be 2 quick wins, and there's work to do on that. So that could be done in the next couple of months if we kind of jump over all the hurdles. Something else on my mind, but I can't remember. So
there's plenty of time. We'll come back to you if it comes back. Yeah. Al, anything you wanted to add on your wish list?
Sorry, I was actually just hunting the internet for a link for you.
Sorry, forced to multitask. Where we were just talking about magic wands and what you'd like to ideally add into the database to make it even better.
I mean, as I said, I know we've mentioned it repeatedly, occupations. I think for me, as a psychologist before I came into education, I would like to look at getting in more survey data so that we can start to look at choices along, because at the moment what we've got is a very functional analysis of if you do these things, this is where you might end up. And I'd like to see something more about, and as Jude was saying, there are richer choices around importance of careers, and people are interested and motivated by different things. I'd like to wrap in some of that sort of analysis.
That's really helpful. Karen?
Yeah, I agree actually very much with what you were saying, Jude. You know, outcomes beyond the financial outcomes, you know, the well-being and mental health of our young people, I just think is crucial. And UK-wide, Leo, I think would also be a fantastic resource.
Yeah, great point, Karen. I'm going to come back to that next. So thank you for flagging that one up. But Jude and then Frank, and then we'll come back to that UK point.
Sorry, I'm muted. Yes. I agree. I think we also, one of the things I'm quite interested in, which kind of touches on this theme, is actually whether there's any chance we could get something like career ambitions on there, because that would kind of give us what the person kind of saw themselves going into, you know, in the future, which might sort of give us some insights into what they're, you know, what they value and all that sort of thing. So, for example, a nurse, you know, if you want to go into a nurse, actually judging by pay, unfortunately, isn't something that kind of they would come out well on. So something like that would be useful. More generally, though, I think it's worth making the point that we shouldn't just sort of think about what we can add to Leo, although adding occupations and health hours worked, Frank, definitely. If we can do, we need to also think about what we can link Leo to, and the Digital Economy Act really gives us the opportunity to move forward with this. And I think to date it's kind of been underexploited for good reasons and what have you. But now I think with the Leo being moved into the SRS, etc., we can really sort of move forward and start motoring with this, particularly something which is very close to my heart, although actually I don't think the Digital Economy Act covers this, although it'd be great if it could do, looking at health, impact of health issues on not just mental health, by the way, on people's outcomes and education.
Great, really helpful. And Frank, you wanted to come in again?
Yes, and Jude slightly hit my thing about actually it should be making Leo easier to match with other data sets. But linked to that actually is Leo potentially is a great resource for evaluations. And we've done evaluations where the data is within Leo. So we know, again, notwithstanding issues about sort of counterfactuals, that we could say apprenticeships compared to non-apprenticeships gives you this returns, that apprenticeship data is in Leo. But you couldn't, for instance, say if someone goes on a school visit to a job, more employer visits, do they get better jobs? Because that data is not in Leo. But if we can find a way of getting the data of people who've gone to a school in school visits, or even RCTs which have done that, and find a way of getting that data from the Leo to match into names and addresses of people, and maybe even people who sort of match individuals who haven't, if you can do potentially score matching. That facility is there. I think it would really sort of turbo boost the amount of quality and the amount of evaluations DFE does.
Really helpful, Frank. Sandra's made a great point in the chat about the cohort studies, like the Millennium Cohort Study and LSYP being a really important part of the picture here. We're involved in a piece with King's called Young Lives, Young Futures, which is an ESRC funded study that's going to look at a cohort as it moves through. So I'm going to pop a link to that in the chat, because I think that's a really important point to factor into. Karen, you raised an issue that's dear to my heart and that Adriana's been mentioning in the chat, which is just about kind of cross UK. I think we've had a couple of helpful links from Jenna and from David on some work that's been done in Scotland and Wales. But to anyone who'd like to come in, do we think there's a potential for a kind of cross UK data set that could be kind of, could work across the 4 nations?
We have had discussions with colleagues in Scotland and Wales, and I know there's going to be and UFS will continue to have conversations about that. And I think we're looking to try to coordinate what we do with people like Future Skills Scotland and our equivalents in Wales and Northern Ireland. I don't think Northern Ireland actually has a Leo at all. Whether we'll have one thing is, I think, it's just a bit more complicated. Yeah. The difference between Scotland, Scotland is a radically different education system with hires, and how do you get it? I mean, it could do it, but I think if we could just have it so it's coordinated and people can access it themselves and do that themselves, might be an easier way than necessarily the government having to fix it.
Yeah, really helpful, really helpul.
I think
I want to ask.
Add for that.
Of course, Al, please.
Yeah, I mean, Frank's right. There is an agenda within the kind of the centre of government to make UK-wide data collections more normal. So there are discussions across the nations as to how to do that. But as Frank said, this is not a short-term solution. This is something to watch for in the future, and there'll be significant challenges to overcome about differences in systems.
That's really helpful, Al. And I want to ask one final question, and I'll come around for just a last reflection. But there are so many policy questions we could ask from this. It's almost kind of a bit overwhelming if you're not careful. But I wanted to come maybe Al to you, then Karen, then G, just to ask what are a couple of kind of key things that you think we haven't asked yet from this data, but which could be kind of really interesting questions or areas to focus on.
So I guess and certainly I saw in the chat questions around how health fits in with children's trajectories. So obviously child health is particularly important, and it feeds that. So child health not only impacts adult health, but also it feeds through into adult, so I'm thinking mental health and physical health. So potentially adding in, looking at ways to link health data into Leo would offer a lot of other opportunities. And as I mentioned, eChild, which is already linking health data, but of course the idea of bringing these linkages together is complicated. So yeah, lots to do.
Really helpful, Al. Karen, any areas that you wanted to flag for future work?
So perhaps this links to the opportunity that I set out is, I think that is such an important question to ask, and I think we should want our research community to be asking that question too, so they can understand what we already know, what we don't know, what's possible with the data, where other data sources might or other kind of research approaches might be able to add to the picture, and allow there to be a way of building on what's gone before and understanding what the gaps are. And so collectively we build that picture.
That's really helpful, Karen. And Jude, any thoughts from you? And if you could segue straight into your kind of any final thoughts, then that would be wonderful.
I'll try and cover it off as both things. So one of the things which is quite dear to my heart actually is thinking about the cost of things in the round, okay, and more particularly I suppose is the cost of failure to intervene and help people sort of achieve better outcomes in their life. And I don't think this is something we do enough of. What we look at is very much the decisions are made about cost at this particular moment in time, rather than the longer term cost of not doing something at this time, and then what happens to that person's outcomes as a result of not intervening, perhaps. And I certainly would like us to start to think of using the Leo data set, actually start to sort of think about some of these groups who leave the education system without fully achieving their full potential, perhaps, and what the overall cost of that might be on the country.
That's great, Jude. And I think we've got time for just a final word from you, Frank, in terms of next steps here.
I think one thing I'd like on Leo actually is Leo is the start of some research. A lot of time when you do analysis, you find there's a big variation of very similar people according to Leo, which end up with very different results. And that's because Leo actually isn't that rich. It's a hugely powerful thing, but it actually isn't rich data. I think we should start that analysis and then do surveys on key groups to see what causes those differences. I'd like to see more of that, bringing admin data and we mentioned survey data, but maybe new survey data on the back of that. But wonderful. UFS, I think we're going to use a lot more just getting skills data and mappings, and ASH has already been discussed. So we were
wonderful.
Yeah.
Huge thanks to all of the panelists from today. What a great hour and a half. I'm exhausted from all of that excitement. So huge thanks to our audience as well. I'm looking forward to joining you for another session soon. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.